Hi, welcome to Numerix Video Blog. I'm your host, Jim Jockel. Joining me today, Paul Rawadi, Director of Research at Alphacution. Paul, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here, Jim.
Continuing our conversation on transformation, a word that's tossed around a lot. As an analyst, why don't you give us your definition? How are you seeing transformation play out within financial services?
Well, there's two pieces going on here, and as I think we've discussed in the past, it comes down to process. Whether you're going to take an existing process and re-engineer that process, or you're going to, in fact, replace the existing process. Digital transformation is more about, when I think of digital, I think of radical shifts in the capabilities, which gets more to the process replacement. I no longer have to buy the camera and the typewriter and the phone and the recorder and the GPS. I actually have all that in the same type of device. That's a classic example of radical disruption and radical transformation that I don't have to re-engineering an existing process. I actually can swap it out. But a lot of the major players in the ecosystem don't have that luxury. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of interconnectivity. There's a lot of, I'd say, regulatory weaving that's gone on where they're satisfying regulations. You can't just, it's nice to talk about banks being disintermediated in this case in financial services, but there's a lot more than just having technical disintermediation in order to have business disintermediation. So I think what we have to distinguish between what's radical and what's maybe just an extension of ongoing evolutionary change management exercises that gets lumped under this umbrella of transformation.
So let's talk about some of the research that you've been looking at, is how to quantify transformation.
Right.
And I think part of the challenge is almost how do you benchmark that enterprise TCO, if you will. Perhaps give us some insight to the way you're thinking about it.
Yeah, so I've thought about this for a few years, that the way that we model the ecosystem is very labor intensive, and a lot of times analyst platforms are not designed to dedicate so much time to this project. So when I first set out to start up Alphacution, I made it the center of what we do, which is trying to build this model that helps us tell the stories. Typically, you would just tell the stories based on outreach or based on experience, but now we're so much more hungry for the data. So the first phase of this modeling is really to define what the landscape is worth. And it turns out that if you believe that in the case of, say, the largest banks in the world being among, if not the biggest buyers of technology and employment of IT personnel in the world, in the financial services ecosystem, that most of that data is public. You can go to their annual reports, you can go to their 10Ks and 10Qs and look for data points, some of which aren't giving you exact transparency, but as I like to say to folks that I discuss this with, like a massive Sudoku puzzle, if you can get close to the context, you can at least make a better guess than if you can't observe the number. So what we've done is gone out and look at an increasing spectrum of banks and others, but I focused on the banks given how much they do spend on technology. We're numbering 58 to 60 of the largest banks of the world, and we're now tracking technology spending for that piece of the ecosystem that is now somewhere in the neighborhood of $240, $250 billion a year, broken down between IT personnel, hardware and other infrastructure, and software, which assumes that the data is baked in there somewhere. Does that answer your question, or you want to unpack it a little bit more?
No, Paul, thank you so much. You know what, we're going to talk about that in just a few more minutes. Thanks for joining us, Paul, and we're going to continue on quantifying transformation in just a moment.